That the motion be agreed to.
Mr Speaker.
I recognise on my left the Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Mr Speaker, it is with much pleasure that I rise to speak on this bill. It has been around for some time, and I think the Minister rightfully points to approximately 10 years, I guess. Arising from the good work of my colleague, who will speak after me, who initiated a review of the pieces of legislation that govern food production and sale and the exporting in this country. As a country, we are entirely dependent upon our ability to do this and produce safe, reliable, high-quality food for consumers all around the world, as well as people who buy and consume or are given food here in this country. So it is indeed a very, very important piece of legislation, and it did take some time to develop. In fact, it was almost there prior to the election in 2008, and then it sat around for a while. The government, the national government, then did introduce the bill about in 26th of May, in fact, 2010. It sat around for a wee while. They were a bit unsure as to whether they should take it on. And again, it took some time until we have now a piece of legislation that I believe is real progress. The Minister, of course, did raise what has been the primary driver of the national government, of course, and that is reducing costs. And everyone thinks that's a great objective because they know the cost of everything, but they don't realise the value of some of these pieces of legislation. And in fact, the integrity and reputation of New Zealand as a producer of food is probably the most valuable and most important thing that we as a country can uphold. So this piece of legislation has to firstly uphold that reputation. And in fact, the Select Committee, in looking at the SOP, realised actually that we needed to emphasise even more the primary purpose of the bill and the SOP. And so we stated, or had put into the commentary of the bill, quote, to maintain New Zealand's reputation as a producer and exporter of safe and suitable food. And I think it was absolutely essential that we did that, because the Minister, as she said, could imply that it was about reducing costs for industry. Well, no government wants to add costs, but we don't want to deregulate, as the national government did in housing, in mining, in banking and in electricity, Mr Speaker, because the results of that were disastrous. Alongside this bill, the national government is deregulating meat inspection. So while we are moving to incorporate a robust system here, in fact, alongside it, we're creating some risks. But more about that later, Mr Speaker. As I say, this does amend not just one piece of legislation, but a number of them that go back some time, Mr Speaker, and they are certainly due for the once-over. And I'd like to work through, I guess, as the commentary does, just outlining some of the focus points of the legislation. The sale of food by small producers was a very topical political issue, both of the previous government, I can remember having a discussion in Cabinet about it, and the incoming government, where people involved in fundraising activities primarily, the sausage sizzle, I guess you could say, and the such like, they were concerned that they were going to be regulated out of existence or have to meet such costs and such compliance that they wouldn't be able to do that. The previous government and the national government now, supported by all members of the Select Committee, realise that that is not what we want to do. We cannot have that happen. And this SOP, I believe, clarifies that, and I acknowledge the Minister's efforts in this area. The second area of scrutiny, for probably about the third time, I guess, was the one of food recall. And that is where there's a suspected problem with food, the ability of the Director-General to step in and recall the food is essential if we are to prevent any further reputational damage to our country, or indeed to that of public health or anyone who might consume unsafe food. Mr. Speaker, we've clarified that, and I guess the onus of proof was the point of debate. We believe that if there's a reasonable belief that the food is unsafe or unsuitable or contaminated, then that should mean that the Director General should be able to recall the food, and I think that's a fair threshold. Mr. Speaker, I've spoken about the purpose of the bill, and we must keep that in mind as we move through there. Food safety being the greatest priority, and along with that of public health. One of the other issues raised, Mr. Speaker, was the one of clearance of imported food. With the high dollar in more recent years, we have been bombarded, and some might say flooded, with imported food products. And the issue of how that should be cleared was one of some debate at the Select Committee. We have a biosecurity system that, in my view, is not up to scratch entirely. We have a system that allows products to come into the country to be then cleared in most part by officials, by biosecurity officials, to then be distributed through the country. With that imported product comes some risk. With food, there's an additional risk, and the pork industry is having to face up and trying to manage that risk as we speak, Mr. Speaker, because of an adjusted import health standard that I won't go into at the moment. Mr. Speaker, on the clearance of imported food, because we have a new joint border management electronic system, there are some issues and questions that I think still need to be asked as we move forward from this legislation. And the bill will, as amended, will now allow food to be cleared through electronic assessment and approval. And that is, I guess, part of the streamlining process, but it does raise questions through the whole area of biosecurity as to whether that is sufficient. And the opposition puts on the table, Mr. Speaker, our commitment to scrutinise this and follow very carefully the issues of biosecurity, because I personally am not convinced that we might have this absolutely right. Mr. Speaker, there were issues around search warrants and the ability to move in and seize product that might be contaminated, and I think the Select Committee across parties has attempted to get that right. Mr. Speaker, if I can go on to an amendment that I will put before the House in committee stages of this bill, I believe to be tomorrow, and that is the one of country of origin labelling. There has been a huge amount of work to progress, as I say, the integrity of our food safety systems, to put often more burden on the growers and the processors of our food to ensure that if we export, we can say to our consumers that this food is safe, it is high quality, you can be guaranteed that we have certified this and there's no harm possible from this. Mr. Speaker, in doing so, we have the contradictory situation where we share most standards across the Tasman through the Australia-New Zealand Food Safety Authority, but New Zealand has sought an exemption to the country of origin labelling provisions. And there'll be people who might stand up and say it's complex because we have mixed products and ingredients in food. I accept that. But most of the countries throughout the world have a standard mandatory country of origin labelling regime, and it's time that we implemented that ourselves, Mr. Speaker. If countries like Argentina, Brazil, Greece, Hungary, Japan, Mexico, and the list goes on, if they can have country of origin labelling of their food and consumers know where their food is coming from, then why not New Zealanders? Why not New Zealanders? So I'm asking all parties across the House, and we've had positive indications from some thus far, that they will be supporting the amendment I will bring to the House tomorrow, and I ask the government to reconsider their position, because it's not a trade barrier at all. It is not giving huge advantage to our producers. It is saying, if you grow and produce this food in our country, then you should be able to label it, and anyone else who's not doing so should have to say where their product came from. Mr Speaker, it's a fair proposition, and I hope that the House will put that up. Mr Speaker, can I say before I finish, there is an overarching concern that the opposition lay on the table, and that is that this national government removed the Food Safety Authority as an entity and merged all that expertise into the Ministry for Primary Industries. Labor puts on the table now that we will set up an independent Food Safety Authority once again, with the expertise, with the focus and with the ability to implement this piece of legislation when it passes through.
I call the honourable member